rounds, and every student goes through those. And it's been an honor to work with Anne these past 4 years. Obviously, if you're here, you know she's an outstanding student, much like her colleagues in the room. But it's a joy to be here now at the very end as well, as opposed to where we were 4 years ago. It's where everyone was 4 years ago. So, some logistics, the agenda for the next 3.5 hours. That's just a check.
You're shortening it up.
That's a check, right? Anne, in just a second, is going to get to present her research, and she's going to get 30 minutes to do that. You may think, well, why 30? A dissertation is very important, right? Surely she should get 60 minutes, maybe an hour and a half. Fundamentally, the oral defense is for the committee. It's for us, and heaven knows we've read the document. The challenge is to take those 100-some pages and put it into a concise, coherent 30 minutes. That's the challenge. It wouldn't be difficult to tease that out over a much longer period of time. So 30 minutes. I'm not keeping track of time, but she knows that's the agenda. When those 30 minutes are done, then we, the committee, will get to ask some questions first. I'll defer to the other two committee members, Dr. Jim Rickabaugh and Dr. Janice Jones. I'll let them go with their questions. I'll wrap it up, and then we can see if there's any follow-ups as well. When we're satisfied with the answers that Anne has provided, we will open it to the room. So that's an opportunity if you have some kind of personal vendetta. This would be the time. Yes.
Study group.
Yes. And you can ask anything. You might think, well, I don't have a good question to ask. You'd be surprised. Often you may. Something that she has brought up during those 30 minutes. So while the dissertation and while the defense are done individually, the dissertation and the defense are not a journey that's traveled alone. And so before Anne starts, I would like, aside from the committee, everyone to go around the room and just briefly say, what is your connection to Anne Ecker? And I say briefly, this is not the time to hear about when Anne was 17. Let us know. You all have traveled this with her, in a way. What is your connection to Anne in a way? So Eric, what do you start?
Anne is one of my cohort members, and I believe a good friend, and I've tried to support her in every way possible that she needs.
Danita Ball, I'm a member of cohort 42, and I like to consider Anne as a friend.
I am Brenda Turner, and I too am a member of cohort 42, and Anne and I have known each other for quite a bit because we both served similar roles in our districts.
Dr. Rickabaugh, as these are all doctors as well, because they defended, and we've kind of stuck together throughout cohort 42, and Anne is second to last in our group, trying to be the first group to get everyone to defend, so really trying to bring in the support from the group as well. So
I'm Evelyn Owens, and I am Anne's mother and very, very proud to be.
Not Rodeo.
I'm Jennifer Cosgrove. I work with Anne in South Milwaukee.
Rita Olson. I'm the superintendent with Anne and a good friend.
Dave Newman, lots of connections with Anne, but what stands out to me is when she told me she was going to enroll in the program and how excited she was. So it's exciting to be with her on this journey and be at the culmination of it.
So thank you all for being here to show your support. And I personally want to thank Dr. Rickabaugh and Dr. Jones. Serving on a committee, you don't get to stand up here and talk like I am and have some level of recognition. And yet they put in a significant number of hours into crafting the final product in a way. So thanks to you all. I also want to say thank you to Dr. Frida Russell, the Dean of the College of Education and Leadership.
Hello.
Frida has been instrumental in shepherding and kind of protecting our program, sometimes from the different ways and influences of the university. So thank you, Dr. Russell.
Proud of
that flexibility.
Thank you, Dr. Russell.
One final logistic. After we are all done asking questions, the committee, we will go over into a different hallway. We'll chat about Anne's performance for just a little bit, and then we'll come back and let you know our thoughts, and we'll go from there. So with that said, Anne, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Preston.
Well, I know the thank yous have already been presented and you've all shared your thoughts. I am truly honored and blessed to have all of you here. Each and every one of you has had a vital role in my journey, and it has been a journey, a long 4-year journey, and just blessed that all of you are here today. So Dr. Jones, Dr. Cosgrove, Dr. Rickabaugh, thank you, and my friends and my family. It means so much to have you here. And so I know you're all very curious about what I'm going to say, and that's part of the point. And so you all do have a little card, and I'm going to ask you to hold on to that and not open it right now. And so I'm here to tell a story today, and I'm hoping that it's a conversation and sharing an opportunity of little of my journey through curiosity, motivation, leading to innovation. So it all begins with a great idea, and the great idea comes from somewhere. And so when we think about the path and my journey through this research, it really has been to learn more about curiosity, motivation, and innovation. And what are those crossroads? What can we learn about the individuals who are successful? Curiosity, children, we see that they're innately curious about the world around them. They're fascinated. And when they encounter something, we watch them and we have this awe of what is going on in their mind. And yet we hear over and over again that maybe as adults aren't as curious as children. So why is that? Is it school? Is it something that happens when our children enter the world? Is it something about that industrial age type of educational system that we are sucking the life out of our children, that we are not allowing them to be curious as adults? Is it that we haven't encouraged them through motivation? So what is it that we know about children and adults? We also know that we live in an ever-changing global society and economy, and we have to be in a place that we are connected with ourselves, connected with each other, and we know what's going to drive that next great question, that next great innovation. Yet, this represents and epitomizes, unfortunately, the state of many places of the world and the workplace. Between 2014 and 2024, 9.8 million new jobs are going to come to the world. 9.8 million new jobs. And yet, from a 2013 study, we know that 13% of employees feel engaged in their workplace and feel as though that what they are doing is making a difference. With all these new jobs coming forward and only 13% of individuals feeling engaged, I think we have to do more. And so my research was really looking at what is it that we know about those that have been successful and innovative, and is there a possibility to influence that percentage? And so looking at that path of the crossroads, there were two essential questions for me as part of the research, which were very difficult to tease out, I will be honest, based on the nebulous nature of curiosity, motivation, and innovation. The first question is, what are the lived experiences of innovators on their path of curiosity and motivation to innovation? Lived experiences elicits a concept of a qualitative research. This wasn't a quantitative. I wasn't exactly looking for the why. There was no p-value that was going to say yes or no. I was interested in what do we know about these individuals, these innovators. Second question that I presented is, what if any relationship exists between curiosity and motivation? So wanting to know about their experience and then that crossroads of that curiosity and motivation. So it begins with curiosity. See? You are curious. Interesting, right? When we look at the word curious, you are curious. And yet right dead set in the middle of that word curiosity and curious, I am curious. So that's part of the research bias that I brought to the presentation and the information is that, yeah, I was inherently very curious about people. And so taking a dive into this concept of curiosity, there was a spectrum of ideas, and I need to determine what I was specifically going to look at. So from a framework, a theoretical framework, I was interested in curiosity presented by researcher Daniel E. Berlin. In 1954, Berlin presented his theory of curiosity. And it was really pinnacle at the time. Curiosity has been researched for centuries. It shows up all over the research. Yet in 1994, when Berlin put this forward, it changed the concept in the research world of, oh, so curiosity potentially has a drive behind it. And Berlin postulated that there's really two types of curiosity. Perceptual, which is this thrill-seeking, gets your juices going, like, oh, I wonder about jumping off a cliff. How might that feel? The other curiosity that he presented is epistemic, and that's knowledge-based. And he presented this concept that what separates humans from lower animals is this drive to fill this well of knowledge, to seek additional information. So when I put together my wonders around curiosity, it was that epistemic curiosity that really drove me into looking at filling that well of knowledge. What type of information are individuals seeking? So knowing that Berlin postulated this concept of drive naturally led me to, well, motivation has to come in there somewhere. And so as I was thinking about the two types of motivation is purpose for meaning, movement towards something greater, I could have chosen extrinsic, meaning external rewards, or intrinsic. And I was really interested in that intrinsic motivation. What drives people from the internal needs? And so the framework that I decided to base it on is self-determination theory from Deci and Ryan. And Deci and Ryan postulated a variety of different intrinsic motivations, but the one that I landed on with that self-determination theory of competence, autonomy, and relatedness, to me felt like the right one. I could have chosen any number, but we know in research of the 10 million decisions that you make, at one point you just need to decide. The last aspect of the framework I was interested in understanding is this concept of innovation. Innovation of the third of the nebulous concepts, curiosity, motivation, and innovation. All right, let's operationalize it. So I decided to go with the framework of Dyer, Gregerson, and Christensen, really big names in the Harvard Business Review, and they have these 5 behavioral skills that they say comprise an innovator's DNA. So what are these 5 components that they have found are really essential in seeing behaviors relating to innovation? So that's where I began in deciding. Walt Disney, imagination, curiosity. It wasn't a surprise to me to find a quote from Walt Disney that it's that curiosity that keeps leading us down new paths. And my growing a curiosity on this subject is what led me down this research path. Any one of these images probably evokes to you a feeling of, oh, curiosity, the cat, Adam and Eve, Einstein, the Wright brothers, or innovation, Steve Jobs, the iPhone. What perpetuated Steve Jobs to pursue this innovation? And interestingly, in 2011, there was a Forbes presentation that he wasn't curious because he wanted to be successful. He was successful because he was curious. And that to me felt like an idea I needed to pursue. So I needed to build the research. And in building the research and putting together this framework, there's this aspect of curiosity, there's this aspect of motivation, and then there's this aspect of innovation. But why? What's my purpose? My purpose is really then to describe the essence of that relationship between curiosity and motivation. Again, from a qualitative research standpoint, I wasn't looking for an exact reason. I was looking at describing that experience, those lived experiences for the individuals. So relying on the backbone of Creswell, I also knew that in designing my research, it was very imperative that I was able to describe, interpret, and analyze the lived experiences of these individuals through their pathway. So it's a phenomenological research study, meaning I was looking at the experience that these individuals brought forward, and I'm borrowing their thoughts, their ideas, their intuitions, their perspectives to create a deeper meaning of the significance of that human experience in relation to this phenomenon. So we'll talk a little bit more about how the phenomenon could have been different with different groups of individuals. Yet I just needed to decide. So thank you to Van Manen for allowing me to borrow that aspect of phenomenology. So where did it begin? It began with a purposeful selection of individuals for my study. And so we know with qualitative research as well that it can't be random. It has to be specific and intentional. And thank you to guests Neemley and Mitchell that really forced me to say I better be certain on why I'm choosing these 7 individuals. So from an opportunistic snowballing sampling, was presented to me 7 people, and I needed to engage in a protocol of a pre-observation with them. Are they going to be right for my study? And the questions I need to ask is, were they inherently curious? Because that was an aspect of my framework. Were these individuals motivated? And did they have an innovation? So that's where I needed to stop and be very clear that innovation didn't need to be a product. George Couros, in The Innovator's Mindset, said that it has to be new and better. That's it. It could be an idea. It didn't need to necessarily be something that you could see or visualize, but it could be a new idea. So I called up all 7 of them, and in my first interview protocol, I asked them all questions, and luckily, based on the framework that I put together, all 7 of them qualified to be a part of the study. So that was great that I didn't need to keep searching. So the next part of the study is, now that I had all 7, I needed to learn about their experience so that I could describe, interpret, and analyze what they brought to the table from that phenomenological aspect. So Miles, Huber, and Saldana, thank you to Yanni, that's for you, Preston, bringing the idea of data condensation versus reduction. So in a qualitative study, my goal was not to reduce. So when you think of condensation and water coming together and it condenses, you get all these mass molecules all over, and they form globules of water. Those globules for me were the big pieces. So I was really looking to condense the data so that themes then presented themselves from the 7 individuals, their experience, and their phenomena. So in describing, interpreting, and analyzing their experiences, I looked at 3 levels of validity: descriptive validity, interpretive validity, and theoretical validity. So in thinking about descriptive validity, I needed to describe the experience in such a way that was accurate, meaning that I wanted to ensure that what was being said was actually being said. So with the phone interviews, I recorded them on multiple devices in case one failed, but I recorded them so that I could listen to them multiple times. I also chose to utilize a transcription company, so thank you, Dr. Rikova, for SpeakRight. And so based on the interviews that were presented, sent them to the transcription company, brought them back, and I also wanted to make sure that they were accurate because that's part of that descriptive validity, so I listened to them again. And I ensured that nothing vital was omitted, making sure that the ums and the ahs and the vital information was there. So the other aspect of that descriptive validity, in addition to the member checking, I had them read it, is I wanted to make sure that as a researcher, I was very aware of my own bias. And so this image really represents that reflexivity. I was constantly thinking about me as the researcher. So I had field notes, my memos, and I was constantly thinking about what wonders did I have? How were my questions influencing my thoughts and my perceptions? The second aspect of validity is that interpretive validity. So now that I have the accurate information, I need to interpret it so that I can present it forward. And I wanted it to be thick, and I wanted it to be rich. So I gathered all that information of what they said, and I really wanted to present findings in such a way that didn't leave anything out either. So that's another aspect of that member checking that went in, and I sent it to the 7 individuals. And I want you to read this to ensure that my interpretation of what you said is accurate. So not only read that you said that it was accurate, but this is really what you mean. And that was really vital to me. I did have 2 participants, individuals, say that they wanted to change a few things. Their changes were very minor. One didn't feel like his verbiage flowed well enough, so he just wanted to change a little the syntax. And the other one said, well, I want to enter in my uncle's name. So, okay, fine, minor changes, not a problem. And the other 5 were very comfortable with what was presented. The last aspect of the validity is that theoretical validity, meaning I was analyzing it against frameworks. So I analyzed the data, literature, against curiosity, motivation, and innovation. So from all of that data that I was able to condense, what was presented were 4 themes. And the themes are really the data pieces that come forward in that data collection. The first theme is identity. The second theme is problem solving. The third theme, relationships. And the last theme is conditions. These 4 themes became then my springboard for further analysis. So analyzing then against that curiosity and motivation, what did I find from these 7 individuals and exploring their experience? This is the theoretical model, the mental model that came forward based on my interpretation of the data. And so I'm going to go into greater detail, but I just want to draw your attention to curiosity. It begins with curiosity, and it began with curiosity for each and every one of them, from childhood on. They all demonstrated this aspect of cognitive motivation, meaning that thinking that I want to fill my well of knowledge. I have this desire, this drive to need more information. Very aware of their identity. also very aware of the relationships with themselves and the world around them, pinpointing into a problem. All of them problem solvers. And I'll talk a little bit later about they were also problem seekers. Ultimately leading to a greater purpose, a higher purpose. And when that higher purpose and greater purpose was identified, the interconnection became irreplaceable. It was impossible to separate the innovators from themselves, from their curiosity, from their motivation. At that point, it became a driving force. And so we'll talk a little bit about that higher purpose motivation, which I hesitate to call it altruistic motivation because there's another branch of motivation out there that already had been defined and it didn't really fit with what I was saying. So it is this higher purpose motivation. And then I'll wrap in the aspects of the self-determination theory, competence, autonomy, and relatedness as well. So within that first theme of self, there were several common descriptors that came about from these 7 individuals. And there were 5 really big ones that were present. Innovative, motivated, curious, competent, self-aware, 6 in problem solving. These ideas really were the biggest hallmarks of their identity. So in categorizing these individuals, a little bit more specifically at a granular level, again, there are 7. These are not their actual names. These are pseudonyms. I chose the names based on something that connected me to their work. So I know who they all are, but I wanted to protect who they were as individuals. Here's their ages. So what you see in the standard font are overt comments, overt statements, overt characteristics that came out of the interviews for them. What you see in italics is part of my interpretation of what they said, how they said it, and their experiences. The far right column relates to the stages of proximity to their innovation. So what that meant is, let's take Jobs, for example, 36-year-old male, all males, all white, all speak English, one had an accent, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But Jobs is in that beginning stage of his innovation. So he's created a company, and he's really within a year of presenting that innovation. Finch, on the opposite side of that continuum, 68 years old, he's been there, done that, multiple innovations, and his perspectives were a little bit different. So I categorized them based on the stages of proximity to their actual innovations. So what was interesting about self and that identity is initially I saw the connectivity between curiosity, motivation, and innovation. It became impossible to separate who they were with their curiosity, why they pursued what they did in the world, how that connected to others. So from the very first theme, it became pretty evident to me that there's something with this interconnectivity that wasn't going to be able to separate. So when we think about curiosity from that self standpoint, when Jobs made the statement, your identity is not your flesh or bones, it's your spirit, it's your soul, and it's what you're known for, I thought, well, that's a powerful statement, and it really could be replicated to each and every one of the individuals in the study. The mindset, which flowed really nicely to the innovator's mindset. So again, I was starting to see all these ideas and these connections come together. Problem solving, that second theme. What I found from the 7 individuals in the study is, yes, they were all very interested in filling this well of knowledge and information, making those connections, finding out why, and that why then became this higher purpose, really driven to solve a problem, not necessarily for themselves, but for something else. I think there's an opportunity here to improve and enhance the well-being or quality of life of someone by pursuing this idea. So here's this self piece, problem-solving piece, and this higher purpose piece now coming together. Roger, fascinated with everything. Well, that's curiosity. It is useful, purpose to mankind, problem solving. Over and over again, the quotes, the statements that these individuals made really drew me to the image that you have behind there, and then that connectedness of how they're all working. The third theme, of relationships, is really interesting. I initially thought, well, it must just be about relationships to people and how those people had influenced them. So we think back to self, we think back to identity, early on, childhood, the influences that they have had. Yes, that was very much a theme. other part of the theme is how their innovation created additional relationships. Think back to those previous quotes, higher purpose for somebody else. So it wasn't just a thing, but it was that connectedness with relationships with other people and how their innovation really was for somebody else. It's my duty, obligation to assist people's lives being changed on their journey of self-actualization. Very powerful statements. So last, the final theme, is this aspect of conditions. And so bringing this out, it really was one piece of the fabric that whether these individuals knew, were able to solve or identify those relationships, all those conditions needed to be present for their innovation to continue, for their motivation to be pursued. And when it didn't exist, they made those conditions possible. Some of the individuals left jobs, left high-paying jobs, because it wasn't meeting their self, they weren't able to problem solve. Jobs indicated if I was falling asleep on the job, they made those conditions work in order to be innovative. So it's deeply connected. It's all intertwined. Impossible to separate the curiosity and the motivation. So what relationship exists? A symbiotic, non-linear, completely engrossed relationship with identity, problem-solving, relationships. Those conditions have to be there. Any one piece missing, it wasn't right. Something was off. So if we dig a little bit deeper into the self-determination or the motivation, what do we know about that interconnectedness? Well, when we put the framework back together and we think about competence, autonomy, and relatedness, competence to know enough about themselves and know what it takes to fill that well of knowledge. Competence enough to identify where there are gaps. Competence enough to identify that there's a problem to be solved. Autonomous, and autonomy, as Desi and Ryan describe, is not necessarily just being able to do it, but making that conscious choice that that is what is going to happen, not just out of need, but out of true desire. True desire to make the choice, to be in the driver's seat, to do that. And the final aspect of relatedness, it could not become more evident when you think about the relationships and the relatedness to that higher purpose for themselves, with each other, having those conditions together. It all became the cycle of movement, very fast movement, intertwined. Ultimately, probably the next biggest theme outside of identity is higher purpose. Something bigger, something beyond, not just to get it done. Talk about competence. Talk about compliance. This had nothing to do with compliance. Something much bigger. So when I started to think back about that 13% of employees that are engaged, my curiosity was, how many of them felt a higher purpose versus I'm just doing my job to get my job done. So the last aspect of thinking about self-determination theory was really, it is a drive. Okay, so literally pun intended when you take the C-A-R, car, the drive. That competence, as Desi and Ryan described, is the fuel. Competence is the energy, it's the momentum that gets them going. So yes, it made sense that the competence was that knowledge. When there's more knowledge, when there's more information, they're going to have more energy. They have more. The fuel is full. The tank has been filled. That well of knowledge is there. The autonomy was the innovator himself. So as I mentioned, the innovator autonomously is in the driver's seat. Not a taxi cab ride. The individual's not sitting and going wherever somebody else takes them. You go here. No. Making that conscious choice of how we are going to get there. And then that relatedness is that higher purpose. Driven for the why. When those are all part of the conditions, again, the innovation became relevant. So innovation is a big concept. We talked about it as the last of those big nebulous ideas. So the 5 skills of the innovator's DNA, associating, questioning, observing, networking, experimenting, these are the behaviors and skills that Dyer and Gregerson say need to be there. So as I started digging through, associating, making connections with one another, questioning, aware, that curiosity, that was there too. The observations, the relatedness to the world around them, yep, that was there also. Networking, relationships, finding other people, experimenting, risk averse. It was all there. The components of the DNA were represented in the 7 individuals. So implications for this curiosity? Implications is we need to take a look at our educational system. We need to identify, are we still teaching children today the way we did 100 years ago? Or are we thinking in ways to create conditions to prime curiosity? Are we seeking out how students are driven by themselves, what their higher purpose are, what their motivations are? We talk about a brick and mortar school. Interestingly, 1954, Daniel Eberlin postulated his theory of curiosity. Jetsons, 1954. The Jetsons were thinking about a pretty non-typical brick and mortar facility. So when we think about what is it that innovation is going to look at, I thought that was very curious. So in this global economy, this global society, we need to find ways to connect self, individuals, knowing who we are in the world around us. How do we problem solve? How do we network? How do we create those relationships, ultimately leading to making our conditions prime for ourselves as individuals to lead to that innovation? This isn't going to cut it anymore. We do not need any more individuals who are falling asleep at work because they are not motivated. Their curiosity is not tapped, and they're not going to be innovative. They'll be compliant, but are they going to be happy? Are they going to create that higher purpose? So the last aspect of Stritch asks us really to evaluate what does this mean for leadership, learning, and service. So I am now reaching that journey to be a stronger leader, know more about learning and service. So one aspect that I have decided is learning more about those innovative skills, that innovator's DNA. How can those aspects really help me better understand? How can I observe more? How can I experiment, associate, problem solve, or seek, or build those relationships? And the other part is, how can I foster that in others? How can I help create the conditions so that that innovative awareness is part of what we do, and that becomes the fabric of who we are? So I need to create a new path. One of my aspects of leadership is I need to make sure I help others take the road less traveled. Because we know there's parts of the road we already know that's broken. So it might be tough. We're not quite sure what it's going to look like, but we need to take that risk. We need to be curious about other people's learning environments. We need to be curious about what makes them learn. That's that identity piece. That's the piece that when our learners know more about themselves, they're able to put all the pieces into motion. We need to create opportunities for this to happen. And that's the service piece. The service and hopefully servant leadership that I'm able to provide is being quick to say, tell me more. How? What are you curious about? What is your higher purpose? And we talk about the Simon Sinek, the golden circle, why. It's overused or used a lot, but this is the why. That's that higher purpose. What are our opportunities? Why are you pursuing this? So when you put it all together, other research studies could be performed. We could engage in any one of these pieces and tease these out and learn more about identity. We could learn about the identity of a different demographic. We can learn about the identity of a different age. We can learn about the identity as it relates to kids. In K-12, I think about the academic career plans, the ACPs that are really perpetuating our students to know more about themselves. I'd be really curious for the students that know deeply about themselves. Are they stronger in their academic career plans than other students? So there's a piece there that I'm really curious about. When we think about relationships, boy, I could dive into a whole nother study about the relationships aspect. Could dive into problem solving, problem seeking. What do people do when they're given problems to solve, and what do they do and how do they react when problems come to them? And then those conditions, either optimal conditions or non-optimal conditions. What does that look like? So, there's a lot of other ways that we can dive into further research. Bottom line for me, what did I learn? I learned that it's interconnected. I learned that it's a symbiotic, non-linear relationship that lines in and out, and though all representations make it look pretty linear, there's a ton of weaving in and out. It's relating back to that higher purpose. So when I think about my journey through curiosity, motivation, and innovation, it was a path. Much like the innovators in my study, all 7 of them described their journey. I appreciate them allowing me to research, bring forward some themes around their journey. What is it about? It's about cultivating those conditions: curiosity, motivation, problem solving, and relationships, ultimately leading to innovation. thank you for my journey.
Well done. Yeah. I probably have 24 questions. Let me just confine maybe to 3. The first is just sort of a sense, either from the lit review piece or your observation with the interviewees, and that is, so obviously the people you interviewed had a sort of a strong drive of curiosity. So is that inherent? Is that nurtured? Were you able to tell from them, were there people around them that nurtured that? Because that seems to me to be important in terms of your implications. If curiosity is something that is manipulated by the environment, or could be manipulated, that's an important element.
Great question, thank you. So the first question I asked them of my formal protocol questions really asked this very general question about curiosity and trying to get at their childhood experiences. Because I didn't want to narrow it, but every single one of them brought up, oh, well, when I was a child, my mom, one of them said, my mom allowed me to take the chickens that we had. And I had an idea that I wanted to run a business. I wanted to make more money with my chickens. So I sold my chickens and I sold their eggs and I thought, oh, okay. So when we think about those experiences of curiosity, each and every one of them talked about how their childhood cultivated these conditions to go ahead, take a risk, be curious, wonder. One talked about how his parents bought him the entire set of encyclopedias every 3 years, and he read them up and down, back and forth. And so yes, each and every one of them, when I asked them initially during that initial protocol, are you curious? Do you find yourselves curious and operationally defined? They said yes. I was also listening for how curious, in what ways? Are you just giving me some lip service, but do I really need to know? So to answer your question, every one of them was in a position where they